Hi, welcome. I have been reading Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert and Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. This was the second time that I tackled both books, and while I was reading Anna Karenina, I decided that I wanted to read Madame Bovary immediately after, just to be able to compare them, because I love both books and they have very similar traits and themes, and I thought it would be interesting. So today I am going to talk a little bit about them. I'm going to talk about the writing style, the comparison of main characters, about the translation, and I'm also going to give you some quotes and examples. So, why do these two novels belong together? Both books central about adultery and about a woman who wants to get out of marriage. Each novel critiques the society that these women live in. Of course, this is Russia and this is France. These authors approach a similar theme, but with very different writing styles. In Anna Karenina, we have Anna, who is trapped in an unhappy marriage. She falls in love with another man, and she doesn't love her husband, and her husband starts to despise her. And in Bovary, we have Emma, who is married to Charles, but Emma expected so much more from marriage and married life, but she only finds disappointment. She doesn't love her husband, but the great difference between these is that her husband adores her. He does everything he can to make her happy, but Emma just doesn't see him. She doesn't care about him, and everything that he does just doesn't seem to be enough. Emma, we have two male characters who start to become the love interest, and here we have one love interest for Anna. I noticed that in both novels we get an idea of how society reacts to the situation of these women and on married life. And in both novels we also have dissatisfaction of the female characters, and this leads them to destruction. What I really saw in Emma this time was that she's living a life, or she feels that she's living a life that feels too small for her. And I kind of saw her as this female Don Quixote, because she loves to disappear in novels, and she starts comparing herself to the heroines in these love stories, and they affect her image of how married life should be. Let me give you a quote about this. She read Balzac and George Sand, seeking in them imaginary satisfaction for her own desires. Even at table she had her book by her and turned over the pages while Charles ate and talked to her. Other similarities are that they are both punished for their actions, which was very typical for novels at that time, because everyone had to get what they deserve. And another similarity that I saw was that they are both very jealous. So they go into an affair with another man, and they are very, very jealous concerning this other man seeing other women, even though they are not. Let me give you a quote from Anna Karenina. All the most cruel words that a brutal man could say, he said to her in her imagination, and she could not forgive him for them, as though he had actually said them. This is an example of Anna's jealousy, and both characters have them, but Anna is a really jealous woman, and it kind of got annoying at a certain point. As for the difference in writing style in characters, in Anna Karenina we get a lot of characters, much more than in Bovary. It deeply focuses on all of them, their desires, their needs, their struggles, what is going on inside their minds and their hearts. Whereas Bovary focuses really on the husband and the wife. Anna has a very slow pacing compared to Bovary, And it's not that I need faster pacing to enjoy a novel more, but in this case, I very much prefer the pacing of Bovary. The novel of Anna Karenina is divided into parts, and if I remember correctly, it was at part 6 in Anna Karenina where I got a little annoyed because of the pacing. I think this novel doesn't have the best pacing, in my opinion. I read this one in the beginning of my classics journey, and I was very curious to see how I would feel about it a second time, because we all change throughout our life, and I have read a lot of other classic books since I've been reading Anna Karenina. And I must admit that I had fonder memories of this than I have now. Of course, this is still a great novel, but I thought I would have it in my top 10 or 15 of most favorite books, but actually that did not happen. What I also really love about Bovary is that Flaubert himself, his father, was a doctor, a physician, and you really notice it in his writing because there's a lot of medical stuff in here. And Charles, the husband of Emma, is a doctor, so obviously there's going to be a lot of medical and doctor stuff, but that is one of the things that also really stands out in Madame Bovary. So did my opinion change about these books when I read them for the second time? For both of them, yes. So I told you Anna Karenina was a little bit of more of a disappointment the second time round. I still loved it, but I did have issues with the pacing in the second part of the novel. And it also kind of gets a repetitive concerning Anna, her jealousy, her feelings towards her husband and her lover, Vronsky. And then here in Madame Bovary, I actually enjoyed it more than the first time that I read it, which I did not expect actually, but this is such a great novel. If I would have to choose, and of course this comes as no surprise because I tend to prefer French literature, well, I would go for Madame Bovary. And if you haven't read this and you love Anna Karenina, then I highly recommend to pick this one up very soon. Now, quickly about the translations. So the first time I read Anna Karenina was the Bovary translation, and this is the Penguin Classics edition, which I enjoyed. However, this time I decided to read another translation. Let me see, what's her name? I went for the Constance Garnett translation, and I really don't know which one I prefer. I marked my favorite quotes the first time that I read it, and I noticed that I marked the same quotes in my other translation, which I read on ebook on the Gutenberg project. So the Constance Garnett translation is available on Gutenberg. And sometimes I preferred the Constance Garnett translation, and sometimes I prefer the Bovary. So I must admit that I really do not have a particular preference. As for Gustave Flaubert, the first time I read it was in my own language, in Dutch. I live in Belgium, and I cannot really compare because it was in Dutch, and I always prefer the English version. But this one was translated, by Eleanor Marx Eveling, and I very much enjoyed it. And this is the Children's Classics edition. Stunning, by the way. To end the video, I would like to read to you some of my favorite quotes and to give you an impression of the writing style of Flaubert. He describes things so beautiful. This is one of the lines that I marked to read to you. She came to the window to see him off and stayed leaning on the sill between two pots of geranium, clad in her dressing gown hanging loosely about her. Charles, in the street, buckled his spurs, his foot on the mounting stone, while she talked to him from above, picking with her mouth some scrap of flower or leaf that she blew out at him. Then this, eddying, floating, described semicircles in the air like a bird, and was caught before it reached the ground in the ill-groomed mane of the old white mare standing motionless at the door. I cannot believe how much detail there is in this paragraph. There is so much to unpack. We have Emma standing at the window and you can just see her gown floating in the wind. She's blowing him a flower and the leaves scatter in the wind. Like, there's just so much detail in here and I love it. And just for your information, I did read the English version, but I also did sections in French. But sentences like, "For him the universe did not extend beyond the circumference of her petticoat," just amazing. She loved the sea only for the sake of its storms and the green fields only when broken up by ruins. Brilliant. And then this sentence, "We must not touch our idols. The guilt sticks to our fingers." This is just such great writing. I could also give you some quotes of Anna Karenina. "One may save anyone who does not want to be ruined, but if the whole nature is so corrupt, so depraved, that ruin itself seems to be her salvation, what's to be done?" And this one, "I have no right to enter into all the details of your feelings, and generally I consider it useless and even harmful. Rummaging in our souls, we often dig up something that ought to have lain there unnoticed." I enjoyed both books, but the verdict is that I prefer Madame Bovary. I would love to hear your opinion about these two amazing novels, and of course, I hope to see you next week.